So, Fozia, thank you so much for taking the time today to be a part of our Community of Practice channel here on YouTube. And on behalf of SETI, we want to thank you so much for your leadership today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So, as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
Yes, of course. So I'm Fozia. I'm Director of Impact and Influence at BBC Children in Need. So BBC Children in Need is a children's charity, which is part of the BBC, the global media company. And essentially, what we're here to do is to make sure that children in the UK can thrive and be the best that they possibly can, and they fulfill all of their potential. So we've been in existence for about 40 years. Our funding comes mainly from the British public, so we're slightly unusual. We have a television appeal every year and raise funding through that. And then my team essentially distributes that funding across the UK. So we fund over 1,500 projects across the UK. Most of them are small grassroots community organisations working with children and young people. And my background for the last 10 years or so, I've worked in philanthropy and grant funding, and I've really endeavoured to push the boundaries in terms of what funders do and how we work and what approach we use. And I'm known in the UK for publishing a report on transformative philanthropy, which is all about how you use funding for social change. So it's quite specific, and it's about making funding and philanthropy more accountable, more dynamic, and fit for purpose, really.
Amazing. We appreciate you so much for that. And if you can articulate your personal mission and vision for us, and what inspires you about the work that you do?
Well, I think my history, you alluded to our history and our ancestors. My history very much is grounded in my parents' story. So my parents were first-generation immigrants to the UK, in common with a lot of communities from the Commonwealth countries. They came to this country seeking a better life, we didn't come from a very privileged background, but through hard work, through the dedication of my parents, we were able to achieve and be successful in our careers. And for me, I think you never forget your roots and you never forget where you came from. And the fact that those opportunities were presented to me, I want to make sure that all children and young people who come from backgrounds which are disadvantaged, which are marginalised, have those same opportunities and can thrive and be the best that they potentially can, and overcome the many, many barriers that exist within our structures and our systems and our society. So that's really the passion that drives me. It's about my own personal background, my family, and my community, and those, that sort of personal motivation, I think, never leaves you.
Exactly. It's that purpose and that passion, they combine together, they say actually 3 P's: purpose, passion, people. So whatever order suits you best, that's the line of work that we're in. And that's awesome. So now on the other side, what challenges or barriers have you faced in your work, and how were you able to overcome them, or in the process of overcoming them?
Yeah. I think philanthropy and the funding world was completely unknown to me. My background is actually as a lawyer, a solicitor. I worked in the UK for many years as a lawyer, and then for various reasons, through having children and changing my career, I ended up in philanthropy and this world where, people and organizations have huge assets, billions in terms of wealth, and distribute those assets. But there's very little scrutiny and accountability and sharing of knowledge within the sector. So when I came into the sector, you kind of learn on the job. There's nobody really to say, well, look at philanthropy through this prism, or how we do it in a different country. And so one of the challenges I think that anyone who comes into philanthropy faces is knowledge about different ways of doing things and different approaches, instead of just accepting the status quo, because philanthropy, particularly in the UK, has a long history of working in a certain way. So when you come in as an outsider, somebody who's not been in philanthropy for that long, challenging that system or saying, hang on, is there a better way of doing this? You really need to equip yourself with knowledge. I was fortunate that I did a master's in grant-making philanthropy and social investment. And then I also got the chance through a Churchill Fellowship to travel to the US. And it was my travels to the US particularly which inspired a different way of thinking. I met people who were doing amazing work, who were using funding in creative ways, in innovative ways, who weren't accepting the status quo. And it's through that exposure that I began to really think about how do I bring those principles into UK grant making and philanthropy. And I think the challenge is to expose yourself to different ways of thinking and create opportunities to learn. But then along with that, there comes a responsibility to share that knowledge. And I think one of the things that perhaps was a barrier at the start, not so much now, was that when you do put your head above the parapet and say, hang on, guys, there's a different way of doing this, you do expose yourself to criticism, negativity, etc. You're putting yourself out there potentially in a firing line whenever you say that let's change things. So I think you need to have personal resilience as well, and a circle of support to do this type of work. So the work itself is really important. Challenging and trying new approaches is really important. But looking after yourself and ensuring that you have the support to be able to do that is just as important.
Oh, yes. Support is so important, collaboration, coming together, whether it's on the philanthropy, cooperatives, different sectors like that, and coming together can really make a difference. And that's where a lot of the work comes from, is when you collab. It's hard when you're just trying to be solo. In Africa, it's like if you want to go, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together, right?
Exactly. And I think for me, with the work that I've done throughout my career in philanthropy, it's always been in collaboration, because I think you can only build a momentum or a movement when you have people alongside you. Otherwise, like you said, you're just a solo operator. You need to bring people with you. And I think there's a really important role for people within the system to take people along. There's also a really important role for people outside the system to criticize the system and to say, why are you doing this? And to challenge the system. But you also need people inside who can influence change and who can bring people along with them on that journey towards change.
Exactly. Amazing. So do you have any set of key priorities or anything that you would like to amplify at this time?
I think probably there are two things that I've been working on for the last year, which I think are really, really important. The first, in the UK, the issue of child poverty. So almost a third of all children growing up in the UK are now deemed to be living in poverty. And that's a shocking statistic for one of the richest countries in the world. And so I've been working on a national ambitious initiative to bring funders together in collaboration to build a really ambitious proposal for tackling child poverty. And we're going to be launching that in May, so I'll be able to talk about that more publicly. But that's been really a key priority for the organisation and for me personally. And then the second thing that I've been working on is last summer, there were riots and racial violence which took place in many towns across the UK. And it really brought to the surface a lot of underlying tensions and issues in relation to racial injustice, etc., which I think we haven't been tackling as a sector. So again, I've been putting together a collaboration of different funders to work on a program and a national initiative to address the impact of those riots, particularly for children and young people. So I would say my key learning over the last year has been that funders can't work in isolation. We're so much more effective. And I think funders, charities, the sector, when we collaborate, so rather than one funder saying, I'm doing my bit of poverty work over here, and another funder saying, I'm doing my bit of poverty work over here, I think you can create so much more impact when you work together. And with both of those initiatives, I think the other thing that's really interesting is the move from just funding to working in multidimensional ways. So I talk about this in my report on transformative philanthropy, which where I say that funders need to bring other tools from their toolbox into play. So obviously grant funding is really important, and both of those areas of work will have grant funding. Both of those programs will have grant funding, but those programs will also have two other elements which I think are really important. The first is convening. So convening people around these issues, people bringing them together and creating communities of practice so that they can support each other. There's that, peer support, sharing of evidence, sharing of the burdens and the responsibility, which I think is really important. And then the other element is amplifying storytelling. So how do you bring about narrative change in terms of, the experiences of people who live in poverty? How do you amplify their voices and allow them to shift the narratives and perceptions about people in poverty? There are many perceptions about, well, people who are in poverty just simply aren't working hard enough, are just not trying hard enough. So there's some work to do in terms of shifting perceptions of poverty. But I think what you can see hopefully is this shift from moving from grant funding only to actually looking at what are all the other tools that we can use to bring about social change. And one of the things that I always talk about is movements like #MeToo, climate justice, Black Lives Matter. Those movements were so powerful and they weren't grant funded at their catalyzation. It was about people coming together, having a laser focus on what's important, connecting across social media, then bringing these people together, building a narrative of why social change was important. And so I think funders and the charity sector really need to look and listen to these big social movements and try and incorporate that methodology into the way that we work.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. It's that passion coming out, like whether you have funding or not, the mission has to be heard at least, and then when you get that support, it'll just amplify tenfold when you get that proper support. Yeah, so I understand. Awesome. So let me ask you, how do you feel about the future of social impact overall?
I think if you work in this profession, you have to stay optimistic. It's we're in the business of hope and optimism. You have to be, otherwise you can't stay in this sector. You don't have the resilience. And I think the thing that helps me is meeting the projects that we fund, meeting amazing youth workers, community workers who are bringing about change in their communities, who are literally saving lives. And, the work that they do, I'm so fortunate that I get to meet people like that who inspire me every day. Because if you were to watch the news, which I'm really reluctant to watch these days, you would be, you have constant negativity, you have constant, really difficult, challenging stories all the time. And so how can you possibly cope with all of that, especially working within this sector? But I think when you go and meet inspirational people on the ground, every week, who are on a shoestring budget, but working with children and young people, working on mental health issues, working on social inequality. When I see those people and when I see children and young people then that's what gives me hope and optimism. So I'm optimistic about the future of social impact because of what I see, particularly from young people.
Same. I always say it almost every interview I do. I talk about the next generation and how, even this generation or Gen Z,
Yeah,
they hold us accountable because they want to see
absolutely.
what did the previous do and what didn't we do and what do they now have to, fix or keep going. And so people like us who are in this line of this passion projects that we're spearheading and we're helping and we're helping to implement, we can now pass that baton on to the next generation and then the next one after that, because we're making some form of impact, in this space. So that's why it's so important for us to collaborate, because we need to know how many people are feeling the way we feel, how many people are doing what we're doing. Sometimes people do work in silos. We don't know.
No.
Sometimes the passion is just here or in the heart. It needs to be manifested into something physical so that we can make this world a better place, right? So yeah, I always say it all the time. That's amazing. So let me ask you, what is your ultimate goal and what does success look like to you and people who you work with? Yeah.
I think success is about building and leaving a legacy where we've improved the lives of children and young people. That's really it in a nutshell. Is for our organization, it's all about children and young people. We want to see them be able to fulfill their potential, and we want to be able to build programs, initiatives which are really ambitious and which are, building movements for social change. So it's not just about giving a project a 3-year grant and saying, that's enough to keep you going for 3 years, and you can keep your lights on and heating on, but not much else. It's about really changing the conditions which children and young people grow up in. And I would hope that would be a legacy for myself and for the organization.
That's right. That's right. It's all about the next generation. We're laying a foundation, but it's really to help them, for sure, for sure. Well, Fozia, I really appreciate this interview. It's very impactful, very inspiring. My last question for you is if you have any closing thoughts or calls to actions at this time.
I think for the sector to really, and by the sector, I mean charity professionals, I mean funders, I mean philanthropists, to really think about building social movements. Social movements bring about social change. And so funding social movements, funding individuals, funding storytelling, funding content production, all of that is just as important as grant funding a project. So and I think the last 5-10 years have shown that we need to be funding social movements in order to bring about social change.
Yeah, absolutely 100% agree. And one step at a time, people like us, we're actually, that beacon of light, and more and more are coming. And it's nice to see, with all the upset and the worry that you hear on the news every day, it's like that beacon of light, and we really appreciate all that you do so much, Fozia. So we thank you again, and we'll definitely be collabing. There's some things I know Victor will definitely send an invite to you to be a part of, so look out for that in the email. And we will close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Fozia, once again, we thank you so much, and we'll definitely be collabing in the near future. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right, likewise. Take care.
Thank you.